Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
So this week, Bloomberg reported that India has effectively frozen Elon Musk's Starlink from launching its satellite internet service in the country. And this is just days before SpaceX goes public in what could, I think, be the biggest IPO in history. I'll be honest, I saw the headline and I didn't fully understand it. I mean, why would anybody, especially India, say no to fast internet? So to explain it to me and to you, I'm joined by my colleague Ashwin Prasad Rao, who's a staff research analyst at the Takshashila Institution, who along with his co-authors published this paper in April called Starlink and Risks for India, which is a paper that, as you'll hear, anticipated almost exactly what just happened. So Ashwin, welcome, and I think this promises to be an interesting episode of All Things Policy, so let's jump right into it. Just to get started off, my first question is, what is Starlink and what exactly did India do this week and why is everybody talking about it?
Hey, Adya, thanks for having me. Starlink is basically internet beamed from satellites. So let's take this example of your phone on the table here. Your phone connects to the Wi-Fi and the Wi-Fi is being transmitted by a router that is connected via cables, which eventually goes to a fiber optic cable going to a tower or a hub somewhere. And eventually it goes into larger and larger hubs, which are connected around the world, which through subsea cables and other infrastructure, which basically forms the backbone of the internet. So it's all decentralized, distributed hardware living across the world, right? Satellite internet jumps across all of that. It is just a dish that transmits Wi-Fi, and this dish directly talks to a satellite hundreds of kilometers and sometimes thousands of kilometers above your head. And it sometimes does rely on cables on the ground, but ultimately it is truly internet in the sky, which means places where cables are hard. Think mountains, think forests, think disaster hit areas where all the cables have broken down, the physical infrastructure is broken down. Satellite internet is a blessing. It can truly be life-changing and provide connectivity where it's most critical or most needed. So to be clear, this is not a new technology. This has been around for a long time now. But the only thing was that it was being transmitted to the Earth from very, very far away, from roughly 36,000 kilometers away through geostationary satellites. The analogy I like to use is think of one huge street light trying to light up half a planet. They were very far away and they were trying to cover a very large area on the ground, and which made these massive street lights very dim, and it also made them slow. Starlink is doing things differently. And this is a new model that it has created for satellite internet, a new template in which it does not use one large satellite very far away, but instead uses thousands of satellites much, much closer. Think 400 to 500 kilometers from the surface. It's more like a swarm. There are likely a dozen over your head at this very moment, and they're constantly whizzing around the Earth. So they are much faster. The time it takes for the signal to travel back and forth is much shorter. And there is some built-in redundancy. If one of them runs into issues or goes kaput, there are others that will just take over. So it's a very highly resilient and redundant. It's a redundancy built in. It's a very resilient system. It's fast. It can actually provide nearly ground grade internet. You can take video calls on it. You can stream Netflix movies. It is a very consumer friendly technology of satellite internet, and the scale is hard to overstate here. You have 10,000 of these satellites in Starlink alone, roughly 2 out of every 3 satellites that work in the orbits today. and all of them are owned by SpaceX, and all of them have been launched on SpaceX rockets, which is the advantage that they have used to build this up, because these rockets are reusable, and they are already a massive business around the world. They serve over 100 countries, and they are trying to get into India as well. And the regulatory process for them to enter India has been on for over a year now. And they were granted a license about a year ago, and they have built ground stations. I think there is one in Mumbai. There are 10 more around the country. They have signed deals with local internet providers like Airtel and Jio for distribution and retail services. They've done all of that, but the final clearance, which was due, which was the only thing preventing Starlink from just turning on satellite internet over India, has been frozen. That is the news that we heard according to Bloomberg's reporting from this week, just yesterday, in fact. So that sounds strange, because after a year of regulatory processes, why did that happen now? But I think there's a lot of clues that inform us why. And the reported trigger is the demonstration of how this technology has been used in Iran, Ukraine, and around the world. And we can get into all of that in the course of this conversation, of course.
Okay. I mean, obviously there's, the way you described it as something where there's satellites whizzing over your head that can provide fast internet, especially in remote areas. That sounds like something that would be great for a country like India, where there's not necessarily as much connectivity as countries like the United States or many European countries. So, why is that a bad thing? What is the danger? And what did your paper find that I think also echoes what India's policy has been lately?
Yeah, the dilemma is, because this is such a transformative technology. If this was a bad technology, or if it was yielding marginal improvements at best, it wouldn't have been a big decision point. But because this is such a good technology, it is such a blessing, and it has so many consequences, does this question become more consequential? The risk isn't the technology itself, because the technology is great. It can do a lot of good for human lives in our country. The risk is mainly about control. Like I said, the internet infrastructure that we use on the ground is very, very distributed. It is spread across the world. It is very geographically rooted. A government that wields control over its geography can control this infrastructure and even disable it or enable it in various ways. And therefore, that decentralized and that distributed nature of this is actually easy for regulation and control and governance. But the thing with satellite internet is that it is a very, very centralized technology, though the satellites are whizzing all around the globe. And it has massive scale and infrastructure that extends to beyond the borders of a single nation. It still is a technology controlled by one entity from one place. And in this case, also one individual who happens to control 79% of the voting rights. That's within SpaceX, which decides the decisions Starlink as a business makes. So let me give you some nightmare scenarios for the government in dealing with a technology like this. Nightmare one: what if Starlink service stays on even when the government wants it off? And this is something that has already happened in some ways. In 2024, there was a raid by Indian security forces in Manipur, and they found Starlink terminals in the camps of militant groups. And around the same time, the Starlink was found with drug smugglers near the Andaman Sea. And in both the cases, Indian authorities did ask Starlink who were the users of these devices, right? Because it's happening within Indian jurisdiction. It is being done to curtail the Indian law and security. So when asked this question to Starlink simply refused to provide information, and it just cited American privacy law. And that's just the nature of this technology, right? Because the control is elsewhere, and you can't really know what is going on with this, whether it was being used, not used, how did the terminals get there. The control that a government has is very limited. And with Iran, this point just got highlighted even more. in Iran, before the war began, before the conflicts ramped up, the regime within Iran shut down the internet. And even after the internet shutdown, which is how a state typically controls information flows in and out of the country, 50,000 smuggled Starlink terminals kept working within Iran. And this became the protesters' lifeline. Information continued to pass beyond the state's control. There were raids on rooftops inside houses. Iran even complained to the UN, saying that its sovereignty is being challenged by Starlink continuing to operate within its territory. And the bottom line was that Starlink actually had the capacity to shut down its services over Iran, but it chose not to. And it could choose, even against the wishes of a state that wields control over that territory. And this might seem like a win for free speech and, like an individual. But think of it like a statesman. Think of it through the lens of statecraft. What does it mean for you to not have any control over information channels, even during sensitive times of conflict, times of threats and security and stability of the country? And I think that has worried New Delhi as well. Another nightmare scenario is just the opposite of this. What if the service is off when you desperately need it on? And this was also demonstrated by Starlink in Ukraine. Ukraine became very dependent on Starlink in the Russia-Ukraine war early on, after Russia attacked a lot of the communication infrastructure in the country. And battlefield communications depended on Starlink, drone operations depended on Starlink. And there were many instances where Musk or Starlink unilaterally curtailed access to its services to Ukraine, even during the times of war. Like, there was this operation in Crimea. It was an active operation and the coverage was refused at a sensitive time. And there is even tweets by Elon Musk, and I can even read one out to you. I'm quoting here. "My Starlink system is the backbone of the Ukrainian army. Their entire front line would collapse if I turned it off." Imagine, as a statesperson, your most critical infrastructure comes with a switch that depends on someone's mood, or even is within someone's choice to turn on or off. So these risks are worrisome. And then there's also the risk of the data itself. In January earlier this year, the privacy policy changed, and it was done quietly. The users were just opted in without being asked if they want to accept this policy by default. And it basically changed the customer data, including location and communication information. They can now be used to train AI models, and they can also be shared with third-party collaborators. I mean, this seems normal for an age where AI models are being trained across the world. But now, 2 weeks later, after this announcement, sometime in January or February, SpaceX merged with Elon Musk's AI company, which is XAI, and now they are a single entity. They even are heading into an IPO in a short while. So that again raises concerns about data security and data localization and all of that. So yeah, that's the risk of this technology and why I think we are taking our time.
Okay, fascinating. First of all, whatever argument one can make for free speech, I think it's terrifying that an individual company or service provider can have access over a technology like this, especially when most corporations have their own interests at heart. And sure, they may say they're committed to free speech and all of that, but you need to take all of that with a pinch of salt. But surely there's ways to regulate this. I mean, can the government not just write regulations that address some of the repercussions of this without taking away the whole host of benefits that technology like Starlink could have?
Yeah, to its credit, India did try to regulate this and made a serious attempt. Last year, India actually imposed some of the strictest conditions on satellite internet operators that is done anywhere in the world. Some of these include conditions like all user traffic emerging from India should come down to a gateway physically on Indian soil. They also said no routing should be done through foreign ground stations, and security agencies should get real-time monitoring over data that SpaceX is beaming up or down. And finally, that there should be surveillance zone around the border regions. And with many of these conditions and others, there was a lot of affidavits that they asked from SpaceX, that SpaceX should promise in writing never to copy or decrypt Indian data outside the country. So one thing that you would catch, the weak word in all of these things is the word promise, right? All of it depends on SpaceX's self-certification, self-compliance, SpaceX signs an undertaking, SpaceX provides this in writing, SpaceX makes that promise, and that's the weak link. So then the ability to enforce this is limited. India can inspect what happens at a gateway in Mumbai, but it cannot actually see what the satellite is doing with the data 550 kilometers overhead. These Starlink satellites actually have something called inter-satellite links, which are like laser links that allow the satellite to talk to its neighboring satellite. So what if the data that is coming down to Mumbai is actually taking a detour through satellites over other foreign gateways before coming to Mumbai? There's no real way for us to know whether that's happening. And so there is also this promise of geofencing near the border regions. But as you have seen in Manipur, in the Andaman Sea, and in Iran, and also in Ukraine, Starlink has always chosen where it listens to rules and where it doesn't. And it has that luxury because of the technology that satellite internet is, because it is not tethered to the surface of the earth geographically in any way. And even in case of Starlink misbehaving or going against Indian government directives, what is the counter move that India has at its disposal? Canceling the license, big deal, because they have operated without license in the country anyway. And if let's say Starlink has suddenly stopped services over India to not favor India in a certain conflict, and then India cancels the license, what's the big deal? Because they have already stopped operations anyway. There is not a big way we can hurt them if they really don't want to service India. And also, the ground stations, there's 10 of them, and it's a very small asset seizure if the government chooses to do that. So ultimately, there is an enforcement paradox, and Bloomberg's reporting also mentions this, that if affidavits and promises are not enough as far as Indian government's perspective goes, and that is what we see playing out in the freezing of this regulatory process as well.
So if the regulatory process has been frozen, what's the state of affairs now? I mean, what is the Indian government thinking?
Yeah, ultimately, per the Bloomberg report, the core question that the Indian government has posed to Starlink is this: given your global footprint and your American ownership, how do you guarantee compliance with our requirements when geopolitical tensions create conflicting demands from foreign governments? And that's a question that SpaceX currently does not have an answer to, and I don't know what answer they will come up with. And ultimately, it is a valid concern, right? Washington has enormous leverage over SpaceX through contracts, licenses, and all the other things that tie SpaceX down as an American company. And, so that means SpaceX is ultimately subject to the authority and interests of a foreign government that is not India, and therefore we have reason to worry. So the government is ultimately reading Iran, Ukraine as demonstrations of what Starlink can and cannot do. And the rejection of the affidavits and the further scrutinization of not just Starlink, but also of Jio's and Airtel's European partners like OneWeb, SES, is all gaining some traction now. They're looking into it. It's just a government trying to see what and how they can respond to this new technology. And I think I see it as a negotiation of sorts between a state and a private company that is backed by another state. So we will see more of this playing out in the coming months.
Okay, fine. My last question is then, considering the fact that millions of Indians could benefit from this technology, and the fact that a freeze can't just last forever, What do you think India should actually do, and how would it happen? What would happen next?
Yeah, I think this is definitely a freeze and not a rejection. It's a pause. And we will see developments, like I said, in the coming months. But in the meantime, and even after the needle moves on this whole issue, there is so much we can and should do. Firstly, a lot of it comes from the sheer market power that Starlink holds as a monopoly over satellite internet on the whole world right now. So India would do well to shrink the demand that Starlink can service single-handedly in the country, which would make us all beholden to this service in a very fundamental way. That means doing a lot of the boring but important things of capital investments, building infrastructure. We already have wonderful programs like Digital Bharat Nidhi and other internet expansion drives around the country. Just do the basics, really invest and develop infrastructure, lay down lines, build connectivity so that there is already a very strong ground infrastructure that is cheaper and easier to use, and make Starlink the edge only case for users in India to use. There's also simply not depending on a single provider. There are other satellite internet providers coming around the country. There is Amazon's Leo. Airtel has some stake in OneWeb, which is also to a degree operational. There is SES trying to do something in the satellite internet sector. There's many others, and India should also prop up its own industry to create some of its own internet providers. They don't need to be tens of thousands of satellites like Starlink. Even if they have satisfactory service over India that is enough to suit our requirements where the ground infrastructure cannot fulfill the demand, that's enough. And ultimately, we cannot reject this technology. That will put us at a disadvantage. So we have to use it, but we just have to make sure we don't marry it. We don't become extremely dependent and restricted by the use of this technology, and we should be ready to have other redundancies built in and move over to other service providers as and when required. Ultimately, this technology is fast changing, and the next generation of Starlink satellites don't even need dishes, so you can't really wield control over terminals the way we are doing now. Starlink satellites will directly beam signals to your smartphone, which means they become even less tethered to geographical control. If you notice all the discussions we had today about gateways and ground terminals and data retention and data localization rules, all assumed Indian equipment on Indian soil. But without that, we don't know how we can control this technology. So India has already rejected Starlink's application for this direct-to-device technology earlier this year. We don't have a rule book for it, so that's something that we have to figure out. But ultimately, this all might sound like, like a very liberal and a very license Raj era policy move to restrict a foreign service technology provider. But think of it as water, and think of it as something that is as essential as water. And India is not saying it does not want the water supply. It's just saying that it wants to have control over the main valve where it can control this flow of water. And it's hoping to gain some leverage and control and compliance before it allows this supply to come and become the dominant one over the other traditional forms. So it's definitely not like technophobic or regressive in its approach. It's just the nature of the world we live in with the technology and the progress.
That's fascinating. I came into this conversation having no idea as to why we rejected technology like this, but it's much more complicated. And now I'm trying to understand why this wasn't the main headline in a lot of articles and why this is something that isn't spoken enough about. And I think you should all read Ashwin's paper. The paper is Starlink and Risks for India by Ashwin Prasad Rao, Adya Madhavan, and Colonel KPM Das. We'll link it in the notes in the descriptions below. And if any of you actually want to understand how satellite internet works, Ashwin has done a great explainer on that as well, and you should check it out. And yeah, you should also check out the Bloomberg report, which we link. Ashwin, thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.